Alright, so here's another installment of the universal knife clamp. Different versions. The variety we've been looking at so far is this one that's designed to be run across a tool rest, and this one here is a version that's designed to be run along a tool rest. You could use your belt grinder to sharpen with a horizontal rest with the same widget if you're just going to sharpen with it. Once you start talking regrinds, you need to get down to a 0-degree incline, and you cannot do that with the horizontal widget, because this part of the clamp will start to hit your contact wheel or whatever else. You would need something to push the clamp body out and away from your contact point, and then you still have to have control of your pivot point. Well, running it along the tool rest eliminates the need for all that stuff. Now if I were sharpening, I would only be using one bar. I'd just set the angle just like I normally would with the regular Tormek, using the stock thing. And then when I get to the tip, I just rock the whole blade. Now the only thing I have to do to make this system work is get the cutting edge parallel to the guide arm as much as possible, so that the bulk of it is parallel. And at that point, even if I cant the thing, this angle here to the blade to the belt stays the same. It moves a little bit because this is also part of what you would use for doing a freehand. If you put your stone there, you could sharpen with it, and you could sweep different angles. And what I found was there's just too much going on. There's usually about a half a degree of difference, and then it shows up when you're grinding. With this setup, I've got the additional Tormek arm that you can order, and in general I think you're supposed to have the main guide bar going one way and then this guy going the other, and then you can quickly go from the grinding wheel to the buffing finish wheel. But in this case I use it as two stops, so I can float in between those 2 points. One is 0, or just a skosh above 0, and then for full convex or whatever I can go to here. Now if I were working on like a Scandi or something where I had to have a definite stop, then I wouldn't be anywhere near 0. I'd probably be starting off at 8 degrees and then top out at 12 or 14, whatever my final angle is. And the cool thing about doing it this way is one of the arguments that a lot of people have against the convex, especially the customs and stuff like that. I've heard Bark River get a little bit of bad rap every now and then. People claiming that, oh, well, it was so thin it just completely collapsed. It's really difficult to get an accurate gauge of where your angle is when you're doing convex on a belt, on a slack belt, anything like that. It's basically a guess, and a gut feeling, and you can get very close, especially if you're doing them by hand on a stone. I had set this one previously on a stone, and I felt I was at about 24 degrees inclusive. When I set this guy up on here to the upper stop, which defines the cutting edge angle, and then the lower stop defines the maximum amount of beginning drop angle on your curve. So this is going from a 0. It's a full convex. It's going from a 0 all the way up to about 12 degrees, and it was almost dead on. So you can get very close by eye. The cool thing about this, though, is that it gives you the option to, when you're doing regrinds or whatever, you could tell a customer, no, it's 12 degrees. That's it per side. I know it. With a starting stock thickness of and a back stock. You could do all that sort of calculation ahead of time. Now the downside is, even though you're guaranteed there's a curve by rocking it between those 2 points, you don't really know what the exact shape of that curve is. So there's still some skill involved. There's always skill involved. People get a powered unit with a guide on it and think that they don't have to keep taking all that stuff into account. They're dreaming. But one of the things I have done on my belt grinder, I got a piece of leather that I can use, and what I'll do when I get into the finish grades of belt, I will flip this over and run it across the platen. And when I do that, I get just a little bit of give. So it's kind of like, well, it started out at 12 degrees, it might be 13 with a little bit of give on a piece of highly compressed leather. For working all the scratches out though, right up to about 320 grit, whatever, it would depend on the person. You can use the flat platen. So on this knife, I always wanted to go back and completely regrind it. It came with a little bit of a flat spine up here that wasn't even when I got the knife, and you know, Bark River does a nice job. This is a really good size, and I've always wanted to cosmetically dress it up. So that's basically what I did. You could use this for Scandi, and if you're just going to sharpen, you would only use one bar. You'd set the angle, you run it across, and by being able to pivot like this, it maintains a really good angle control across the belly and the tip. Probably more accurate than any other system I've used. The Tormek can get very close, but there's still an element of know-how and experience, knowing where exactly, you know, relative to the flat edge of the blade, you have to be on that wheel to get a nice even grind, or you could easily make the tip. Usually the grind will be overly acute and the bevel will be huge. With this type of system, the bevels wind up very even. And so to just do a quick convex on here, this is the whole operation. And again, if this were a stone and these were removed from the Tormek and attached to a base, you could easily just use this to do really good freehand convex. At this point, I'm not going to torment you with a long video demonstration here, but generally speaking, if I could do this without tearing the leather. I usually loosen the platen up, but I don't feel like going through all that right now. So I'm just going to raise it up by hand. And it's starting to tear, but still in good shape. And then when this starts to give out, I'll just keep moving it. And the nice thing about this is it gives you that start angle, that finish angle. You get a great deal of control. And you can run it across and just go in waves as you go up the blade, and be very gentle at the edge because you don't want to grind off too much. And blend it in that way. You can see that's starting to turn out. It will not take long with the leather under there to remove all of the hatching from the previous grinds, or you can actually just float it in between the stops. What I find is, because the surface area in the middle portion of the blade is so much greater than anything you get at the beginning of the curve or at the edge, I wind up just floating that bar up just a little bit off the lower stop. I'm going pretty slow, pretty conservative here, and I'm down to a nice satin finish. I can actually see a little bit of steel buildup where the belt's not contacting. So you get a great deal of control. You don't have to sit here and every time like, oh, if I'm off by a few degrees, I round the spine or something like that. It just doesn't happen. I don't have to worry about that. And I'm slowly working my way up through the belts. I don't know if I'm going to hit a mirror polish on this guy, but I certainly could. If I go with a nice satin finish, and then but right now I'm just, most of the hatching, the faceting from using the hard platen to shape it is all disappearing. It's all through the middle part, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. I've gotten rid of all of the scratches, the deeper scratches from the 60 grit. Blaze belt. I don't do a ton of regrinds, and I definitely don't do a ton of convex regrinds mechanically. I've been known to do a whole bunch of them manually, or freehand on the belt. I don't mind setting up. I most often do them manually, and the only thing I have a hard time with when I manually do them is I have a tough time keeping the plunge line nice and sharp. So for myself, not a big deal. For someone else, so you can see where this is really nice for a project that you're going to keep coming back to. There's virtually no risk of ever going backwards. Once you get this guy locked in, this is a skeleton handle. I did regrind some of the flat in front of it, and I had already done a lot of this knife, and I normally carry it with the scales anyway, G10 scales. But if I wanted to regrind the whole thing, I would simply clamp it back here, hit up to that point, clamp it ahead of it, grind up behind it, match the grind paths, and then go right into the blade, which is what I did. But it does a really nice job. Yes, you can do all this on a regular belt. I could actually be doing this on the wheel, and it would probably be a lot easier, but I can only go up to what the wheel allows, and then if I want to polish it higher than that, I won't be able to. And while the wheel does lay in a really nice scratch pattern, it's not the same as like a leather-backed 320 grit silicon carbide belt. It's still, got a lot of texture to it. Cosmetically it looks nice, but it's not going to win any contests for shine or anything. So it's all a question of what you're working on. If this had been for someone who said, look, I don't care about a mirror polish, it's a bushcrafting knife, I probably would just go with the wet wheel grinder, because then I know I don't have to worry about overheating the blade and any of that stuff. But anyway, just showing another example of it. And this is the way you would go to sharpen with it freehand, and so I easily adapted the arm off of the manual unit to this. Having a bigger tube than the original one makes it harder to do freehand, but you could. And I think a lot of people might actually find that extremely helpful. The amount of extra time it takes to clamp this guy in is probably no more than fussing with a lot of the other guided clamps. And yet when you're done, you have something that is almost foolproof, especially when you do the linear, because as long as you're maintaining contact, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to grind metal away. It's always going to be from the same spot, and it tracks around the belly and the tip very well. So you would have to, the only time you'd have to change to accommodate that is if you have thick blade stock and you don't want a massive bevel. You actually want to go to a more obtuse angle at the tip, whatever, that kind of stuff. But you can never get around that no matter what. There's no guided system that's going to eliminate that element of sharpening, that you're working around the belly and the tip. So anyway, this is the third installment, if you will. Just showcasing a little bit more of what it can do. I'm still trying to get a feel for what it does well enough that it's worth some of the voodoo surrounding it. I'm not entirely convinced, for me anyway, I'm not convinced that it's worth it to use as a freehand guide. Although that's just me talking. If I had a little table here that was set up to the height of the Tormek, and I had a high-end knife in, rather than sit there and go really slow to start freehanding it, especially if someone wanted the angles changed, I would probably use this. I don't know. It would be pretty easy. Pretty easy. Alright, well, that's that. Thanks for watching. Feedback appreciated.